Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast with Eric, Wolf, and Ashi Vale, where we help you become a better industry professional by gaining inspiration from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. With each episode, we meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. And now for today's episode. I'm Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for episode 29 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. And joining me today is co-host Ashi Vale. Today we'll be speaking with Devin O'Sullivan. Devin is a 23-year-old graduate of Hotel and Catering Management from West Clare in Ireland and is the founder of Feast, a social enterprise working to improve food education in Ireland. The Feast School Workshop, our BIA, meaning our food, has been delivered to countless schools in a dozen Irish counties and has reached almost 3,000 students to date. He is a passionate spokesperson for effective food education in Ireland today. Welcome, Devin.
Thanks, Eric and Ashi, for having me. Thank you.
Welcome, Devin. So tell us a little bit more. We're interested to hear about effective food education in Ireland. What inspired you to start Feast and what is it all about?
Feast, it essentially began overnight. That's how the whole business began. It was created in the space of 20 or 30 minutes one night. I wanted to make a charity with the aim of delivering food education and effective food education to every school in Ireland. But that's a big ordeal when you've over 4,500 schools in the country. I was listening for years, for the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of people talking about food education in schools, saying that we need mandatory food education in both primary and secondary schools. But they were doing nothing about it. A lot of chefs with no knowledge at all on food education in schools were saying that we need to make it mandatory and all this kind of stuff. But they were doing nothing about it and talking a lot at conferences and stuff. So creating a buzzword really about food education. And you see it with sustainability. Sustainability is a massive buzzword all across the world nowadays, but very, very few people actually know how to say the definition for sustainability. So yeah, I took a risk. And essentially while I was in college, actually, I was in third year, I set it up as a non-profit, put a lot of money into it. I was essentially paying for children to receive education in schools. I was going around paying all the costs that schools pay nowadays, actually. It was quite expensive. It was quite onerous. I came up with a big list of different initiatives and campaigns that I wanted to roll out to schools nationwide. It was a one-man show, really. It still is a one-man show. And it was interesting, but quite difficult. From then and since then, it's gone on to become a social enterprise. So again, very, very small, just myself on board and doing it. But it's kind of grown to be quite effective nowadays from what it was even a couple of years ago. And it is real effective food education available to, nowadays it's available to every school nationwide. And in a couple of weeks time, actually in 2 weeks, I'm in the north of Ireland, essentially up around North Connacht. So getting in 3 counties in the space of 3 weeks, which is something like 30 something schools. So it's I'm thankfully very, very busy visiting the most schools and more schools than any other food education business or food education campaign, and things are good. And the biggest thing is I am seeing change. There's a lot of change in children's mindsets towards Irish food for whatever it is, the 2 or 3 hours that I'm in the school. And I know we need to genuinely in Ireland, if we are to see proper change, we do need to have a mandatory food subject, not what's there at the minute. We need to completely revamp that and create a high quality food subject based around environmentally friendly, nutritious, delicious Irish food, and some global foods, but a lot of global food has environmental impacts. That's what we need in the long term. But for the short term, Feast is rocking and rolling and doing quite well all across Ireland. And we are seeing change in schools, slowly but surely.
Congrats, Devin. That's really exciting to hear about the change you're making. I'd love to delve into the details a little bit more. Can you tell us about how you're making this change? What are some of the things you're talking about? And what are the issues affecting children or the next generation that you think food education can help solve?
Well, we'll start with the issues first of all. And there is a plethora of issues. The big one being childhood obesity in Ireland. By 2030, we're on track to be the most obese country in the world. Ireland is. And that's a scary statistic given how small we are, really. We're a tiny country in comparison to Russia or the United States or, other large countries, but yet we will per person be more obese than all of these other countries. And that for me is ridiculous when we keep waxing lyrical about our incredible food culture in Ireland, that we've such great shellfish and seafood and vegetables and beef and dairy and all these other, and we're 40 shades of green or anything but. And the childhood obesity crisis in which it is proof of that. We're not 40 shades of green. We've caught up with the rest of the world in terms of how unsustainable we are, and we've actually surpassed them. We're an incredibly unsustainable country. And that is what has to be taught to kids in schools around food. Climate change is a huge, huge talking point all around the world at the minute, especially here in Ireland. There has been school strikes. I think it's up to 2 or 3 school strikes now that have occurred nationwide. They're not learning about sustainable foods, which can actually combat climate change massively. They're not taught about how to reduce their food waste at home. Simple actions that they can implement to reduce their food waste. They're not being taught about that. That's one of the things I'm teaching kids about in schools. And it's needed. It is drastically needed, or else we're just going to continue down a path of being incredibly unsustainable. Conor Spacey, a leader of food waste here in Ireland and how to reduce it, said something to me that stuck out to me ever since. A couple of years ago, he said, we're a nation of wasters. And we are. Per person, we waste so much in Ireland. Over €700 per family per year on just food waste alone. That's pretty much 7 weeks of shopping in a row that we're just throwing into the bin. And that all contributes to climate change, which is affecting Ireland massively. And people keep shooting down the agriculture industry in Ireland, which has a lot to answer for, yes, but individual people have the most to answer for because we keep wasting lots and lots and lots. So yeah, childhood obesity is one of the big drivers and why I want to, I suppose, educate kids on truly sustainable and nutritious food, which doesn't always have to be vegetables. Our shellfish and our seaweed in Ireland and other wild ingredients and other farmed ingredients and beef as well is incredibly sustainable when it's done right and ethically. And that's something that's needed from the other side of the industry. But we have to teach kids about how that is being done and when it's being done and why it is being done. So yeah, childhood obesity, climate change, big issue. That's why I'm doing it. I'm teaching kids about what they're not being taught about at the minute or what they're not hearing in the news. So they're not hearing about the impact of avocados and the environmental impact that avocados and the societal impact that they are having on South America. They're not being taught that, and they're actually being promoted in schools. Avocados are being used by vegan teachers in schools, which there are a lot of actually, and that's a big issue as well, because if you're a vegan teacher, you're biased towards vegan foods. So I'm telling just the truth and the story behind all these foods, and of course I'm giving kids a real taste of unbelievable Irish produce. Oysters, different types of seaweeds, different types of breads, different types of organic vegetables, pickles, showing them how they can reduce their food waste at home, mussels, all different types of meats, cured meats, wild meats, foraged edibles. The list goes on and on and on. It's a 2.5, 3 hour food experience, really. That's never really been offered for any school. I definitely not in Ireland, and I highly doubt anyone's been doing it.
Next time the instructors talk about avocados being vegan, you can point out to them that they're not correct, because avocados are actually pollinated by bees.
Yeah, and the same with almonds. Look at the effect that almonds have had in California.
Yeah,
it's been detrimental, really. That's 80% of the almonds in the world are grown in California. So if you can't really say, oh, the almond milk that I drink, isn't affecting the environment. Rubbish.
We were just in Mallorca, Spain, and all of the almond trees there are dying, and no one was talking about it, but they were not looking healthy.
And they're not looking healthy either in America and California, because it needs so much water. And what's happening in California with how many years? A drought.
Yeah.
So that's not what's being taught to kids in schools, the real story behind the food. And in Ireland, we're getting blasted, the agriculture industry. And I've grown up in the countryside all my life, surrounded by farmers, predominantly beef farmers. And they're being blasted on the media every single day for being unsustainable and the effect that cows have on the environment. And yes, they do have an effect. The science is there. Science proves that methane emissions from cattle contribute massively to Ireland's carbon footprint. But the imported food that we keep buying into Ireland and that we keep thinking is sustainable isn't sustainable. Look at the food miles that all this food that we're bringing into Ireland is racking up. And then we export so much of our high quality food, like our oysters, our shellfish, our seaweed, which is a free food, so many other free foods that are out there. forage foods that you just have to really learn about to use. We had a storm. I don't know if you heard this last year. We had a storm. I think it was Storm Ophelia. Could have been Storm Emma, a bad storm last year. The nation, the entire country of Ireland ran out of bread. Everybody went to the supermarkets to buy sliced pan. Sliced pan in Ireland is bread that's just been sliced up. It's often unbelievably disgusting bread with a huge amount of ingredients, the majority of which are actually chemicals. And literally everybody took off to the shops and bought a load of bread, and we didn't really make our own bread. Nobody could actually, for 2 or 3 days in Ireland, make a loaf of bread. And that just showed how much in trouble we are as a country going forward, really, when it comes to food and food education. Now, there are people out there, myself and people in my family and others, who were grand and we could make bread, but the vast majority of people, and it was all over the place. Ireland couldn't make the most simple thing in the world, bread, for 2 or 3 days. And we bought the shops out of bread left, right and centre because we thought the storm would snow us in and we wouldn't be able to go anywhere. Food education starts at home, but also schools have a role to play in it too. If we can't make the most simple things, we're in trouble going forward. So,
Devin, you spoke about seeing the change that you wanted, and how are you seeing that, and how are you measuring the success that you're having on these children?
It is difficult. I often get asked that. It is difficult to measure the success of a one-off workshop. Yeah, you might be in the school for 2.5, 3 hours, but then you leave the school. It's hard to measure that success and to quantify it, really. You can actually see the change and the change in mindset and opinion of children in relation to food right before your eyes. Oysters, for example, that's the first kind of thing, the first dish, the first tasting that they get when I come into school. So it's Kelly oysters from Galway Bay, unbelievably delicious, very, very sustainable oyster. And oysters have been around way longer than the potato in Ireland, way, way longer. And we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for oysters, essentially. That's how our ancestors and generations back survived when things were in trouble and crops failed, was oysters. But it's always a big talking point in schools because it's a food that is seen as a luxury food item. It's a food that is seen as disgusting because of the way it looks. But then when you tell them the story behind the food, how it is grown, how it is cared for, maintained and harvested, and of course what it tastes like, you can actually see that food memory being created right in front of your eyes. You can see it in the children's eyes. And the reaction's always the same. It takes one brave kid to try it first of all, and then the reaction's always the same. Oh geez, that's not half bad. And then it goes from there. There have been bad reactions and people not liking them, and then you're in trouble because then it becomes a tougher sell. That's the hardest thing to sell to students. This unbelievably sustainable, tasty, delicious food that they mightn't like now, but they will love in 10 or 15 years. You can see that kind of food memory and that kind of light bulb moment in their head thinking, we've been eating all this environmentally damaging, unsustainable foods, and here's something that's on our doorstep that we produce the best of in the world. I'm always biased towards Irish oysters. I think we produce the best oysters in the world. And here we are giving to students. You can kind of see that memory being created. Then when you kind of get to the more statistics, yes, it is hard to quantify the success. You know, a lot of the time there's great discussion. I have incredible discussions with students in schools when it comes to unsustainable foods and it comes to their diet as well. One of the big standout weeks of last year for me was when I was in Dublin. I spent an entire week in Dublin going around to schools, and many of these schools would be what are called JESH schools, so they're disadvantaged schools. But the teachers wanted me to come in, so I came into the school and we did the workshop, went through the whole, whatever it was, 2.5, 3 hour workshop, which is longer than most workshops. There's a lot of information to take in, and these students in the middle of Dublin city centre just could not get their head around these foods. They genuinely couldn't. Food that's been in Ireland for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't understand how I or anybody else like me could survive and live a day without fast food, without takeaway, without the big names in the fast food industry. And they were just mind blown by it. Again, I left there, I think on one school in particular, I left when they were just going out for their break or recess, whatever you guys call it. And I asked them, what are you going to have for lunch now? And they said the typical thing in Ireland, which is chicken rolls. In chicken rolls in Ireland, you have this roll, which is made out of, again, boring, bland, unnutritious bread. And you have chicken, breaded chicken, which is probably coming in from Asian countries coated in bleach and chlorine. And they're having that every single day of the week, of every single week that they're in school. So after, yes, giving them incredible Irish food and talking about it, they were going straight back into what they always go into, which is the unsustainable, bad foods that are bad for the planet and bad for themselves, essentially. All the schools that we're going to, all the students that we get to. It's well over a dozen counties now. At the end of February, it'll probably be over 5,000 students in just 2019 alone.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the 2020 Food Travel Monitor. As the world's most comprehensive report on culinary tourism, the 328 pages of market research feature hundreds of tips, insights, and trends on our industry. The report answers questions like these. How much do culinary travelers spend? How do travelers choose their next gastronomy travel destination? How do Chinese, American, British, and other food-loving travelers differ in their behaviors? Destination marketers, product developers, and strategists will find the 2020 Food Travel Monitor an invaluable resource to attract more visitors and customers and aid in product development and marketing strategies. Learn more or get your copy at worldfoodtravel.org. Devin, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your accomplishments and being such a young person and having achieved so much. First of all, do you consider yourself part of Generation Z, or are you slightly too old for that right now?
Listen, my career, it's been a very short career. It's only, 5 or 6 years into it now. It's been so different to the rest of them. And even my life has been kind of very, very different. I've grown up in the countryside, which is similar to most in Ireland. But I always kind of kept to myself, always did my own thing. And still to this day, that's the way I am. I just kind of do my own thing. In college, I was put the head down, did the work, but also threw myself at every opportunity for every event that was out there and just worked hard. Worked hard then in college, but also out of college in industry and hotels and restaurants. Worked hard there, learned a lot about the kind of the food and beverage side of things, which is an industry that I want to get back into eventually. But yeah, it was constant kind of learning about myself and learning about work and stuff like that and learning about the industry. And especially then the last 2 years, it's been very, very different from most, to set up a non-profit still in college and then to essentially turn it into a business just outside of college after leaving was kind of very different. Most people go down the graduate route or they travel the world. I'm stuck in Ireland for at least 2 years now because of this. Yeah, it's been kind of different. Been lucky enough to go to some incredible events and to speak at incredible events like Food on the Edge as well, an unbelievably inspiring event. There's been a few accomplishments along the way, but the big thing I don't think there's been any kind of big one yet. The big one will be if food education is improved in Ireland. That'll be my big accomplishment, and that's what I'm striving for. If I go tomorrow and haven't changed anything in food education, then it'll be a massive failure. But in 20, 30 years' time, if food education in Ireland is in a better place than it is now, and if I have a role to play in that, then I'll be extremely pleased and very, very happy, because it will benefit my children and their children's children and down the road and down the line. And it'll also benefit Ireland as a food nation, as a food destination, because we have a great culture of speaking about our food, but we have such a bad culture of actually enjoying it ourselves. And that's something I've seen from just working in the industries.
And I think you're our youngest guest ever. Is that right, Ashi? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I'll have to tell a lot more people that, so that'll be my new claim to fame.
No, that's exciting, because we always look for diversity in our guests, whether it's by gender or geography or by any metric. And truthfully, it's hard to find people who are both interesting and qualified really to talk about something of interest to our audience. And it's fantastic that we found someone in your age bracket to share your story. I mean, there's not a lot of people your age who can claim the accomplishments that you have so far.
Yeah, I just took a risk. I've taken risks all throughout my, whatever it is, 5 or 6 years of my career. And even going to college, I dropped out of college at my first attempt. I was going to do an engineering course that I had absolutely no interest in whatsoever. Dropped out of that. That was just a moment of stupidity going for that. Then went back to kind of my roots, back to food, back to kind of hospitality, which those that know me know that I'm not the most hospitable person. I'm great in work and stuff, but I don't know, it's hard to describe. I, like with Feast, I'm always kind of just curious about the system, curious about the food system and stuff. And if I see stuff, even my own workplace, if I'm working in a hotel and things are being done wrong there in terms of food that's being used or waste or anything, I just have an automatic dislike to the place, and then I'm gone. I don't like it. Yeah, I've always kind of done things differently. Setting up a business straight out of college was a risk. Doesn't make money, let's be honest, it doesn't make much money at all. It's not supposed to, it's not designed to, it's designed to make change. And that is what I think turns a lot of people off, kind of taking risks like what I've done when it comes to something that is essentially not really an industry. Food education isn't an industry. It's just essentially a movement. Thankfully, I believe, one of the leaders of food education in Ireland, even in the last only 2 years. But there's an awful lot more to come. But people just have to take a risk, especially nowadays. There's so much that has to be changed in the world when it comes to climate change, and bring it back to our own industries, the hotel and restaurant and food and beverage industry. A lot has to change there for this industry, and the tourism industry as well. For it to become more sustainable in the long term, a lot has to change. And it's up to people, be they young or old, to kind of just take a risk, come up with something unique and different and go for it, really. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And if it works, brilliant though. Keep going and tell others about it. And communication is key, especially, our industry. And nowadays it's so easy to talk to chefs and to other people all across the planet and tell everybody your story and how you came to be. And then others might be able to derive some amount of inspiration from them, and they'll go on. And again, the industry will just get stronger, more secure and more sustainable.
Thank you, Devin, for all you're doing. It's really inspiring. And we hope that there are more people who do that all over the world. I wanted to get your thoughts on how the cost of food plays into the factor of eating native Irish food. From experience, I know that living in California, while the food at farmers markets is delicious, it tends to be more expensive than what you can get at the store.
Yeah, it's a big thing. And that is, again, one of the questions I get asked every single workshop in every single school is from students. And we have great discussions with students. So it's kind of very intimate. So they'd be saying all kinds of stuff to me and asking me about my life and what I eat and stuff. But then one of them would always ask, well, you're after telling us all of this stuff now. What are we supposed to do? Because we can't afford this. My family can't afford this food. But they can. They can if you just are smart about it. If you waste €700 a year, that's the average. Not every family is doing that, but that's the average. They're wasting €700 a year on food. So €700 worth of food is being thrown into the bin. That's 7 weeks of shopping in a row. If you can buy incredible food all year round for €700. If you make connections with farmers, like I've had to do for Feast, I work with only Irish producers, predominantly producers from the west coast of Ireland. But you have to strike up a repertoire with them and a friendship with them. And people, it's not just people who run a business like me or a restaurant. That's people who are working in an office who just want good food can do that as well. And that's what I'm saying to these kids. And yes, they have to take that back to their parents, because their parents are the ones buying the food. But hopefully they will. And hopefully then the parents realize that we have to do this, because yes, it's sometimes costly. A lot of people are saying that Irish food is costly. Not really. When you're buying healthy, nutritious food that you're actually going to utilize all of it, you're actually going to save more money in both the short and long term from just being smart about how you buy that food and what you use of it. I truly believe, I haven't done a research piece on it. I'm sure somebody either has or somebody will in the future. But I do believe that Irish food is positioned cost-wise and price-wise to be as inexpensive to get in both the short and long term as just constantly buying very, very cheap, very, very poor quality food and throwing loads and loads and loads of it away, as we're doing at the minute. So if people just become smarter about their food and smart about how the food that they use and the money that they spend on it, then they'll feel a kind of a heavier wallet. They will save money in the short and long term. But again, that's just me speaking from me looking at the industry costs and stuff that I've come across when it comes to food. And I'm only using the highest quality food in the country in these workshops. And it isn't costing me much, because I'm just being smart about it and I'm getting the maximum amount of food from the food that I buy. So I can do this. I can give 5 or 6 courses of unbelievably high quality Irish food, all sustainable, all artisan, all from within Ireland, predominantly the west coast of Ireland, to students for literally €2 or €3 a head. So,
and I imagine you can probably source a lot of things like ugly vegetables and things that aren't technically perfect to be sold in grocery stores, but if you can get them for a song, then that's what you could use.
Yeah, and that's something I'm hoping to do now as well in 2020 with schools is to create different chutneys with skins and peelings of stuff to be thrown out. We have an incredible charity in Ireland called Food Cloud. So they take food waste from supermarkets and they hold it and distribute it to charities. I'm hoping to partner up with them, or to even just small restaurants that are smoothie bars, especially. They're throwing out loads and loads and loads of banana peelings and skins and all this kind of stuff that is just seen as waste, but is completely edible. So if you can bring that into schools and make different things with that and have the children make it. A lot of the stuff I bring in is just made already. apart from the oysters, which obviously have to be open there, and the cheese is all open there and cut there. But if you can kind of go into schools and have them actually making a banana skin chutney, which I've eaten before. The gent Connor Spacey, which I was talking about earlier on, he made banana chutney for me at an event years ago, and it was absolutely delicious. If you can have the children making this out of something that they would have thrown into the bin before, that again is success to me, and you're changing their mindset. And that is utilizing every single gram of the banana, which would not be the case if we just keep going down the road we're at the minute. And that's what I mean by being smart about the food that we use.
What you're doing reminds me a lot of what Alice Waters is doing with her edible education in California. Really getting children to go out there and grow their own produce so they have a new respect for it. And when you talk about using the peels and the seeds and things like that, when you grow your own food, you don't want to waste anything because you spend so much time and effort doing it. Absolutely. And is that something you're doing as well, Devin, where you're having gardening be a part of food education in schools?
That's interesting you asked that. That's how I first started out. So in 2018, when I first set up Feast, the big plan was to have a school garden in every single school in the country. See, I kind of thought it'd be so easy. I came in kind of thinking this is going to be easy. I'll deliver all this kind of stuff to every school in the country. It turned out to be so difficult, and especially where I kind of first started out with, I bought massive gardens, raised bed gardens, polytunnels for schools out of my own pocket, stupidly, with money that I saved up from working in hotels and restaurants down through the years. And I brought these things to schools and kitted them out with compost and earth and seeds and everything, and spend the day in the school teaching them about how to grow stuff and what it's going to be like when it grows. It was all well and good when you're doing that, but it was done before they went on summer holidays. Then they go on their summer holidays, and I'd have a dozen gardens along the west coast of Ireland to maintain. And this is when I was kind of trialing out stuff. In 2018, the summer of 2018 was an absolute scorcher. So everything was burnt really, and it didn't really work. It's possible, it's 100% possible to teach them about growing vegetables and fruits and stuff. But I think that doesn't go as kind of far as what I'm doing at the minute. So that's why I kind of scrapped that. It was so expensive as well. And you see people talking about, teach kids about where stuff is grown and how it is grown. It is expensive. That's very, very expensive. And it requires so much maintenance. If there is a government-backed initiative, that has to be considered. That has to be done. Bringing in polytunnels and raised bed gardens and doing that, because that is essentially where every food on the planet comes from, is essentially the ground. So that has to be taught to kids. Yeah, we'll see what happens when it comes to education in Ireland in a couple of years. I have no doubt that gardens will have a big part to play in it.
Devin, we usually talk to our guests and ask them what kind of legacy they want to leave behind in their careers, but you're at the start of your career, so we need to ask you the opposite of that. What do you look forward to in your career?
Before I set up Feast, the big plan, and it was a plan, it wasn't a dream, I was certainly planning it, was a restaurant by the time I was 27, which was 4 years away now. That's not going to happen. I'm hoping by the end of this decade, by 2030, I'll have my own small restaurant. I always wanted it to be I still want it to be in the west of Ireland, but at the minute, the industry and the kind of the environment in kind of restaurants isn't very good, and it isn't very helpful and supportive for small independent restaurants. So I'd have to reassess that. Yeah, I'm going to stick with food education. See, it's weird. A lot of things have changed in my short career to date. I wanted to do Feast or something like Feast at the tail end of my career. So after the restaurants and whatever. But because, as I said at the start of the podcast, everybody was talking about food education, but nobody was doing anything about it. So then I thought, I have to do something. If all these people are just talking and talking and talking and doing nothing, I'm going to have to be that one that actually does something. So it's kind of flipped now completely. The work around food education is at the start of my career, and maybe the restaurant, which is a certain plan. Like I really, really want that. That'll hopefully come very, very soon, and then keep going for the rest of my career, while food education will always be there. And the restaurant I'm going to do, like everything I do, is never generic. It's never traditional. Everything I do it's always different. And the restaurant will certainly be that as well. But at its core will be education and teaching consumers and teaching guests and customers about the food that they have and everything about it. That's what I want, essentially, is to stay in food and beverage for the rest of my life, but also have it centered around education and effective education around food. So just constantly telling the story about the food that I use. That's it. And then, of course, I want to be remembered as hopefully an activist and a leader of effective, real food education in Ireland.
Devin, do you have a favorite dish or meal or beverage that you can tell us about?
Favorite beverage? I don't know. It depends on the night, really. It depends on the night for the beverage. Favorite meal, hands down. I've had a lot of good meals, and again, a meal a lot of the time depends on the conditions and depends on the kind of the evening or whatever. I remember Michel Roux years ago when I was in college. He came to our college to do an event, and he was asked the same question: what was his favorite meal? And Michel, I think, he had 3 stars. I think he might gone out to 2. He's a Michelin star chef anyway, an unbelievable quality. And he said that his best meal ever was a McDonald's at the end of the New York Marathon. And that really hit home the fact that, yeah, you can have a good meal at any time. My favorite is always and will always be my mother's roast Christmas goose. Just absolutely incredible Irish, free range goose, red meat, cooked to perfection, everything used, innards, hearts, gizzard, you name it, all used, delicious. And in the company of family, that's my favorite meal and probably will always be. One of my greatest food memories was my first ever oyster. It was just mind-blowing, and it was actually from the same producers that I actually use nowadays. So
how old were you when you had your first oyster?
It was actually only in college, so I would say 4 years ago, 5 years ago maybe. And I'd actually never come across an oyster until then, which again shows that we're not taught about food correctly in schools. We should be taught about oysters from 5 or 6 years upwards. But yeah, I had it in college, and again, just burst of flavor was just incredible. And that was a true food memory with me. I remember that forever. And now here I am using their oysters in schools and teaching kids about their oysters. So yeah, it's kind of gone full circle with that.
Devin, you spend a lot of time teaching the youth about eating and food education and diet and nutrition and so on. But what kind of message would you like to send to older people who, or maybe we're stuck in our ways, we have habits that we need to unlearn, but what's the one message you'd like to leave with them today?
Well, every one of their actions nowadays has an effect, and a big effect, on the generation to come after them. To parents that are out there shopping in big, massive supermarkets that don't care about where these supermarkets are sourcing their food from. Every single gram of food that you buy from them has an environmental impact. It has an impact on societies. It has an impact on animals, where it is grown or harvested or whatever it is. When you consume that, it has an effect on you. It has an effect on your kids. And if you don't use it, if you don't consume it, you're throwing it away, which again has an effect on the environment. So every single action you have when it comes to food has an effect on the environment or your family or you or your kids, or it has an effect on everybody. Food really is, I heard a great quote last year. Food is a cause of climate change. It is a victim of climate change, but it is a solution to climate change. And no doubt about it, it really, really is. And I think that's what people have to understand. They look at climate change and they say, we need to tax the big polluters. That's what a couple of non-profit groups here are saying, tax the big polluters. We are the big polluters. The people, individuals are big polluters collectively. And we need to be very, very smart about what we do, especially in relation to food, which in Ireland, I don't know about other countries in the world, but Ireland, a lot of our carbon footprint stems from food, our food production, our food consumption, and our food waste. So we need to really, really look at what we do at home every single weekly shop and look at the story behind the food. That is what I'm always trying to get to, the story behind the food. A lot of people keep saying in schools we need to have food education and do this and do that. And one person last week said we need to learn about the sounds, how food sounds. What a load of nonsense. We need to learn about the story behind food. Who cares about what food sounds like? This is kind of Montessori baby stuff. Rubbish. Learn about the real, true life story behind the food, and then we can go on and shape a better.
How do you really feel, Devin?
Angry is how I feel. Angry.
Well, Devin, we love what you're doing, and are just so excited for it, and you're very, very inspiring. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you very much. And thank you, Eric, as well.
Devin, thanks. It was a pleasure listening to your words of wisdom today, and I hope I get a chance to meet you next time I'm in Ireland. Absolutely. Whenever you are, just let me know. We'll bring you to some incredible oyster farms and try some good cheese and wine. It sounds perfect. Thanks, Devin. Thanks, Eric. We'll see you soon, guys. Thanks for listening today. The Eat Well, Travel Better podcast is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association, the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. Our mission is to preserve and promote culinary cultures through hospitality and travel. By doing so, we empower local communities and entrepreneurs with the knowledge and tools needed to reach new food lovers and gain a competitive edge. Founded in 2003, now each year we shepherd a community of 200,000 professionals in more than 100 countries. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you can learn more about us, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our family at worldfoodtravel.org. Until next time, eat well and travel better.